Bene, sono le 11.
Very well. It is 10:45. Let's start punctually because we have a tightly packed schedule and the things we're going to listen to are extremely interesting. I won't take up much of your time. I'm Giuseppe San Marco. I'm the director of the Eni Enrico Mattei Foundation. And my task today is to welcome you all, to welcome the audience. I see we have many participants. I wish to welcome Professor Sachs. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for your presence. I'm going to speak Italian because it is the official language of today's proceedings. Do excuse me, Professor Sachs, for speaking Italian. But those who understand English well will have their ears spared. And I wish to thank the panel members. They are called upon to discuss Professor Sachs' presentation. And then there'll be some concluding remarks. So just a couple of words about our foundation. The Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei is a foundation with some assets we received from the ENI, and our goal is that of studying sustainable development in all its different interpretations, economic, the environment, and the social sphere too. The foundation has been working for more than 20 years. It was founded in 1989 and 89, and it's become a world leader on studies on climate change. We have recently opened up 2 new research programs and areas. And one concerns energy, and the other the economy and society. And it is very sensitive to all those problems of geopolitical and social changes which take place at an international level. Today's topic, Feeding the Planet and Energy for Africa, is absolutely consistent in a transversal fashion in our 3 areas of research, and it is part of the activities which the foundation carries out. I don't only want to tell you about the foundation, I would also like to briefly introduce Professor Sachs, who is our guest today, and he is going to hold a lecture on this topic. To define Professor Sachs using just a list of his roles and publications is a difficult job because he's a very well-known person, known internationally. He is a highly innovative person with many interests, so it's very difficult to describe him just with these roles and titles. Professor Jeffrey Sachs is an economist. He is a writer, author of various successful books like The End of Poverty, Commonwealth, The Price of Civilization, and his most recent book on John Fitzgerald Kennedy, To Move the World, JFK's Quest for Peace. He is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He has worked a lot and very successfully too on the topics of economic development, environmental sustainability, the struggle against poverty, the cancelling of debt, globalization too. But above all, he's well known because he devoted a lot of his energy to reach the Millennium Development Goals, 8 goals which go from the reduction of extreme poverty to health, to gender parity and the environment. And these are goals which roughly 190 member states of the United Nations have committed themselves to reaching by the year 2015. Speaking of the Millennium Development Goals, Professor Sachs is special advisor for the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. After he took over from Kofi Annan, he's the director of the General Secretariat of SDSN, a project of the United Nations which involves scientists, engineers, leaders of the corporate world and of civil society, and experts in problem solving. This is a project which has the goal of promoting the singling out of solutions which highlight the potential of innovation in technology and in business models in order to promote a sustainable development. I'm very happy to remind you that amongst the members of another of the organisms of sustainable development solution networks, the organism called Leadership Council, there is also Mr. Paolo Scaroni, the Managing Director of ENI, and he's also our host here today because he is the chairman of the ENI Enrico Mattei Foundation. He will hold some concluding remarks and will join us shortly. Mr. Paolo Scaroni, always within the framework of the activities of the SDSN, guides a worker group, one called Solution Initiatives, devoted to energy access for all in sub-Saharan Africa. These solution initiatives are important projects carried out by networks of experts from different backgrounds, studying and developing innovative solutions, both in terms of technology, business models, institutional mechanisms, public policies, showing that these are applicable and that if they are enforced on a large scale, can indeed produce a great positive impact on development and on its sustainability. But we'll have an opportunity of discussing this later. Together with Professor Sachs, I would also like to thank Professor Pier Cocconcelli, who's the professor at the Cattolica University of Milan and a member of the Scientific Committee of Expo 2000, Mrs. Licia Berlini, who is in charge of the Feeding Knowledge Project Department of Expo 2015, Mrs. Eliana La Ferrara, who's a professor at Bocconi University and a member of the Scientific Committee of the ENI Enrico Mattei Foundation. At this point, allow me to open a bracket. I wish to inform you that just last week we held the board of directors of the ENI Foundation, which has changed the composition of our scientific committee and has appointed as chairman Michel Santechouche. It's a great honor for us to have such an important name. Michel Candesus is the honorary chairman of the Banque de France. He was already governor of the Banque of France and director of the International Monetary Fund, and he is currently working in a foundation which deals with those themes inherent to Africa and Africa's development, a panel of great international experts. To round off, I wish to thank Professor Colombo from the University of Milan, who will be here today, who is here today, and who will have the task of chairing the event because I'm going to sit with the audience. I wish to thank Expo 2015 for having organized this event with us. They are a partner for the support and cooperation provided. Let me give you one piece of technical information. We have changed the order of the presentations. After my presentation, we will listen to Professor Cocconcelli, then Mrs. Perlini, Professor Perlini. After that, we will have Professor Sachs' lecture, and then we will continue with the final speech of the Managing Director of ENI and Chairman of the ENI Foundation, Mr. Paolo Scaroni. So thank you, and I wish you fruitful proceedings. Professor Cocconcelli.
Buongiorno.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For me, it is an honor as a member of the Scientific Committee of the Milan Universities for Expo 2015 to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs. This is a very great opportunity we're offered today to discuss the main topics which concern Expo 2015. Sustainable development, especially in a continent like Africa, which perhaps has the greatest problems of food safety and food security. In Italian, unfortunately, we have just one word to say both food safety and food security, and problems of energy scarcity. I'm certain that today's presentation opens up a very important discussion. It's a discussion of fundamental importance on the development issues we will have to tackle in the next few years. We're in a situation in the agri-food business of great imbalance because the approach, which for years was considered the main approach, namely that of redistribution between rich countries and developing countries, no longer works today. Those who live like us operating in the agri-food industry, and we see the problems our companies have every day, know that the scarcity of food becomes a problem not just for developing countries, but for developed countries too. So we need different solutions. So we need a more creative approach. We need new attempts to try to put an end to this paradigm which has taken shape. And this is what the Scientific Committee for Expo of the Milan universities is working on. A scientific committee which puts together the competences of the 7 universities of Milan. Here we have represented just 3 universities, the Università degli Studi, the Politecnico of Milan, the Bocconi University, the Cattolica University, which I represent, and in this network we also have the Ulm University, the San Raffaele University, and I think I've listed them all. I hope I haven't forgotten any other university. So these universities, for the first time, thanks to the topic of Expo, to feed the planet and energy for life, has the task of concentrating different competences. We've created a network and we're starting to work together. For example, last week, together with the World Food Programme and FAO and the European Union, we had a meeting on international cooperation in the agri-food business, how research and training, higher education can become drivers to develop good practices for sustainable development, and above all, linked to the topic of Expo, to feed the planet and energy for life. I'm sure that Professor Perlini will present in an in-depth fashion how the good practices we are developing can become an example to develop and implement in practice in the less advantaged areas of our world. I wish to conclude by thanking the Enrico Mattei ENI Foundation. They act as hosts today, and thank you to Expo 2015. The fact of having Professor Sachs here with us is a great opportunity for us to go from a stage of discussion to an application stage for sustainable development, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Expo Milano 2015 gives great importance to the identification of best practices for sustainable development that fall within the overall theme of feeding the planet, energy for life. The Universal Exhibition will offer an important opportunity to promote those best practices. World leaders will discuss progress achieved toward implementation of the Millennium Development Goals as well as new Sustainable Development Goals in the post-2015 development agenda. The worldwide call seeks to promote best practices related to 5 thematic priorities, evaluating them across multiple dimensions: innovation, social impact, environmental impact, concreteness, transferability and replicability, openness, attractiveness, sustainability, dissemination. All actors involved in food security are invited to respond to the call by filling out the online application form. These include governments, communities, civil society, the private sector, and national and international organizations. They will also play an important supportive role in its dissemination. All the admitted best practices will become part of the Expo Milano 2015 legacy. They will show how countries and people all around the world can positively interact within their specific environment and beyond, thus becoming leaders of innovative solutions in their own countries and within the international community. 15 submissions, which will be chosen by an international selection committee, will be exhibited in Zero Pavilion of the Expo site as windows on the future. The collection and promotion of best practices will be supported by the Feeding Knowledge Programme, launched in 2012 by Expo Milano 2015, with the objective of identifying priorities and key issues to reduce food insecurity. To this end, Feeding Knowledge has created a network of researchers and experts and a technological platform to share ideas and results gathered from local experiences on an international scale. The creation of national-local points will help to fill the gaps between local stakeholders and allow them to fulfill their needs and share their potentials directly. Feed knowledge on food security. Apply to the call.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. Participants to this important event to discuss the issue Feeding the Planet and Energy for Life and Energy for Africa. This video launches an important call. I wanted to show it to you, and I hope that this has aroused your curiosity to know what we have done in these years to develop the topic in terms of intellectual and conceptual heritage, but I also hope at an instrumental and service level for Expo 2015. The topic Feeding the Planet Energy for Life is per se a call, an appeal for sustainable development. The report of the Brutal Commission of 1987 says that this is a change process for which the exploitation of resources, investment objectives, the guidelines of technological development, institutional changes are planned not just for current needs, but also with a view to the future. So sustainable development is perceived universally as the right definition for an approach which balances the well-being of humanity with that of the biosphere. And this balance is a fundamental condition to feed the planet and to give energy for life. To feed the planet and energy for life has an evocative power. It amplifies its universal meaning. The fact that Milan won the Expo 2015 is also due to the importance of this topic, the link between us and the planet, and the fact that there are limited resources for our survival and for our development. This must take place in the only environment which the world has, that is planet Earth. And when faced with these global issues, we don't have a single solution which applies to each geographical, social, economic, and political context. It becomes increasingly important to share and to acquire know-how. And the access to know-how is also very important. It's an indispensable means of proceeding towards sustainable development. So Expo has reflected upon the central topics in order to define and highlight the profile, the structure, the goals of its immaterial legacy. The conceptual pillars which derive from this reflection are the following. So sustainable development vis-à-vis food safety as a reference area. Then the identification of themes which derive from this, like consolidating activities and methods for the acquisition and sharing of knowledge. The acquisition and sharing of knowledge as a main goal, and identifying the means and technology necessary in order to achieve our goals. From the very beginning, in order to tackle this ambitious goal and to provide certain bases and serious routes to this action for Expo and for what will take place after Expo 2015. We have had two partners working with us. One is the Polytechnic University of Milan for all the technological part, and then the Institut Agronomique de la Méditerranée, that it's with its Bari Institute, which takes care of all the scientific part of the business and the operational side in the different theme areas. So that is why we drew up the Feeding Knowledge Program, a program opened to sustainable development programs. And at the moment, in the Feeding Knowledge project, we have two programs underway. One is a scientific Euro-Mediterranean project for food safety, and the other is an international call for tender for good practices for sustainable development for food safety. The first project is a network which involves 12 countries in the Mediterranean area, including the Balkans, but in the next few months, we hope to be able to address ourselves to Africa too, and sub-Saharan Africa. The second is addressed to the whole world. The reference theme areas are 5, that is the sustainable use of natural resources, the quantitative and qualitative improvement of agricultural production, socioeconomic dynamics and global markets, sustainable development in small rural communities, consumption models vis-a-vis the diet, the environment, society, economy, and health. And these two projects are in synergy one with the other because both projects have the same theme areas upon which they work. And the Euro-Mediterranean project has, as countries involved, sharing this program. And it has set up some local points within the Ministry for Agriculture and the CNR of the different countries. And in the next few days, we will start a feeding knowledge trip in the different countries in order to discuss with the local points. And here I open a bracket. Every year we have to show the different countries involved the stage of advancement of the program. Countries which enrich our program with advice, criticism, priorities, and so on. All this is constantly taken into consideration in the course of the program. One of the activities of the program was and has been the drawing up of web papers in cooperation with the different countries based on the priorities of these countries. And we will prepare policy papers. The so-called technological platform you saw an example of in the video, contains a policymakers section too. As I said before, the global exchange of knowledge and dialogue is this technological environment, this technological platform, which you can find on the website feedingknowledge.net, because as the 5 reference themes are included, isn't it, Professor Sachs, in the 10 topics destined to launch the initiative on the Sustainable Development Goals, I hope that the method, I hope that this tool we are improving upon and which will be developed further can become a useful instrument for Professor Sachs, for the Eni Foundation, for the Siena University in this Euro-Mediterranean project, in this initiative, and for all those who are certain that sustainable development is the only condition for the survival of humanity in the future. Thank you.
Okay. thank Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei for this opportunity to have Jeffrey Sachs here with us, and I would like also to thank Dr. Sammarco for his introductory speech and my colleague Sandro Cocconcelli for giving us some brief idea of what the Scientific Committee of Expo is doing, and also to my friend Alice Perlini for giving us this very nice and impressive project which is Feeding Knowledge. Now, Professor Sachs, the floor is yours. And in the meantime, Eliana and myself will try to prepare some very tough questions for you.
Buongiorno, everybody, and thank you very, very much for having me here. It's really an enormous privilege. It's really an enormous privilege to be at the Fondazione Eni. I've been reading publications of this very important institution since it's the beginning, and I get once a month big thick packages of new working papers that I always treasure, because this is one of the few places in the world focused on real problems, and the research work is always of the highest caliber, very sophisticated modeling, but always about real issues, and it is a privilege for me to be here, and I hope it's also the beginning of a deeper partnership in the coming years, because there are so many wonderful opportunities. And I want to thank ENI generally for partnering with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and with the Earth Institute in many wonderful projects that I'm going to describe. We're really grateful, and it makes a huge, huge contribution, I believe, to the world, ENI's leadership. It's also great to be here on the eve of this fantastic Expo coming up, which is going to be a world event of great note. I can't wait to see it. We've seen the drawings of the pavilions and all of the content that we know will be there, and that's a tremendous thrill. The subject of the Expo, I think what makes it so compelling, feeding the planet energy for life, is one of the most complicated, if not the most complicated, challenges that the world faces. And in many ways, I think sustainable food and sustainable energy may be the most complicated policy challenges that humanity has ever had to face at a global scale. Of course, from time immemorial, how to feed populations and how to provide the basic energy for life has been humanity's challenge. But it's only our generation that is viewing this at a global scale, because we've really hit some new complications, especially what are now called planetary boundaries. We've hit some limits at the global scale which did not exist in earlier times. And this has made the question of food and energy and human well-being in general a truly global challenge. Not only global in the sense that every place in the world has to confront it, but global in the sense that we have to look at society as an interconnected world scale and understand how these very, very basic and fundamental needs of humanity can be met. And that's what I want to speak about for a few minutes, with, of course, a focus on Africa. There is good news, and I think it's important to start out because we will move to bad news soon, but we have to keep the good news in front of us and the potential for even better news ahead. This is a picture from The Economist magazine recently. Hooray, hooray of the declining poverty rates worldwide. The truth is, with all of the global challenges, distractions, climate change, and other often horrific challenges and problems that we face, the last 20 years has been a period of real progress in fighting humankind's most ancient scourge, which is the extreme impoverishment and food insecurity and vulnerability to disease. During the last 23 years, I could say, since 1990, there has been remarkable progress in reducing the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty. There are many ways to define that term. The World Bank takes the simplest of these ways, not adequate entirely, but still illustrative, of measuring the household incomes and then setting a poverty line, which is now $1.25 per person per day, measured at international prices, and measuring the proportion of households below that poverty line. And as best one can do, because obviously measurement is not simple, the World Bank estimated that in 1990, about 44% of households in developing countries were below that extreme poverty line, and that by 2010, the ratio had declined to 22%. And I would guess that by today, we are under 20%, because the progress has continued even despite the financial crisis worldwide. In the developing countries, there has been continued economic growth. And in Africa, for the first time, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is the second fastest growing region in the world, just behind developing Asia. And so there is progress, and the progress is reaching populations at the bottom. But the progress is fragile, and it is definitely not consolidated. On the one hand, we can see a path that is absolutely thrilling. You can extrapolate the trend, not only mechanically, but actually conceptually, and see that within one generation, by the year 2030, it is feasible to eliminate extreme poverty. And that goal is sufficiently plausible that the World Bank has adopted it as its official target in a meeting this May of its development committee. And the World Bank, I always regard as a somewhat cautious conservative institution. So if they've adopted a goal formally of ending extreme poverty by 2030, it's a good sign that this is a practical possibility. But as we plunge deeper into this challenge, we're going to see that while progress has been real, and while further progress is absolutely within reach, the challenges are also enormous within Africa and worldwide. I should say that in Africa, the progress on reducing poverty is also evident, but more recent, because during 1990 to 2000, the poverty rates, at least as measured by the World Bank, and I would say as evidenced by the disease burden and other indicators, were going in the wrong direction. After the year 2000, Africa began a very constructive period of development overall. Many conflicts were reduced or brought to an end. Economic growth increased, and there was a concerted effort to fight extreme poverty, hunger, and disease under the Millennium Development Goals. The poverty rates in Africa remain the highest of any region in the world. But from 2000 to 2010, the poverty rates came down from about 58% for the sub-Saharan region to 48%. Unfortunately, and this is one of the weaknesses of the Millennium Development Goals that needs to be remedied in the Sustainable Development Goal period, we have a many-year lag of data. Even in a world of instant big data, we don't have up-to-date information. we need at least yearly, if not more current information. And I always think if the UN can't provide it, we have to go to Google or Facebook or the NSA or someone else, because they have daily information, too much. But we need to bring information to bear on this in a much more rapid way. This is the good news, but there's more. And that is that our growth and the progress that's being made has also become part of a more complicated syndrome. In most of our societies, even if poverty has been reduced at the bottom, inequality is rising. And along with inequality, social and political instability, and, of course, a massive environmental question mark. I'm showing you here the United States trend in inequality, a rather shocking rise of inequality in just one generation. The U.S. is now the most unequal country among the high-income world, and we feel this very much with huge gaps of well-being depending on especially education levels, and we see that social mobility across generations has declined markedly in the United States. A child born in a poor family now has very little chance to get out of poverty. And this is a new phenomenon for the United States with some deep political as well as market-based reasons. We also know, and Italy exemplifies this crisis, that all over the world, youth unemployment is extraordinarily high. So economic development is right now not working for young people in most parts of the world. And what this graph shows is the change of the unemployment rate from 2008 till now, according to age group of workers. And it's surprising that the older workers have seen actually a decline of, this is actually the non-employment rate. It's technically not the employment rate. It's one minus the employment rate. Let me put it that way. What we've seen is that the employment rate of older workers has gone up, but the employment rate of young people has gone down markedly and persisted at a much higher level. And this is reflected in extraordinarily high unemployment rates in Italy, in Greece, in Spain, in fact, all over the world. And we know that the consequences of that have been a tremendous amount of social instability. And it always strikes me how the pictures look almost the same everywhere. And even these days, of course, for distinctive reasons, whether it's Bangkok or whether it's Kiev or other places in the world, young people are out on the streets. There are no doubt different phenomena at play, but there's a lot of social instability, and almost everywhere at play is high youth unemployment and a sense of very unequal societies. We had it in New York with the Occupy movement, and I hope that one reflection of that is the election of a very progressive new mayor who is won in a landslide election in November, Bill de Blasio, who ran on a platform that New York had become a tale of two cities, to quote Charles Dickens, and that we needed a mayor who could bring back New York to one city, and he won in the biggest landslide in New York history. So this is a phenomenon that is a very widespread phenomenon. But another dimension that makes this even more complicated is the growing environmental threats. They are creeping up on humanity because the time scale is slower than the political cycle, and it's slower even than our consciousness. This is a decadal scale change. But of course, from an Earth's history point of view, the rate of change is completely unprecedented. We're in the most dramatic change of the Earth's climate probably in the history of the last 100 million years, perhaps. Even with all of the changes of orbital cycles and abrupt change of climate that the Earth in its history has known, what's happening under human influence is unprecedented. You're looking at the picture of Typhoon Haiyan, which struck the Philippines last month. This is, according to preliminary estimates, the most powerful tropical cyclone ever to make landfall in measurement history. Of course, one can't know whether that particular storm was anthropogenically driven, was a human-induced mega storm. But one can say that the data show significant increases of the frequency of megastorms in all of the ocean basins. And when one looks at the range of extreme events underway in the world occurring by flooding, drought, heat waves, we are seeing a dramatic increase of frequency of extreme events, often taking massive loss of lives or causing massive damage. We had our own disaster in New York City last year with a superstorm that was also one of the most powerful on record. But because the sea level on the east coast of the United States is now 1 foot higher than it was, or a third of a meter higher than it was a century ago, the storm flooding consequences of that hurricane were unprecedented, and the damage was estimated at about $60 billion of loss from that single storm. We're pushing, in short, against what have come to be known as planetary boundaries. These are limits or ranges of human activity that are now so strong that the Earth and human systems risk rapid, nonlinear changes in behavior, generally of a highly adverse sort. Whether it's the climate shocks or the destruction of the marine ecology through the acidification of oceans, or the massive pollution coming from the heavy fertilizer use and then the runoff of nitrogen and phosphorus, or the depletion of groundwater, or the destruction of habitat causing massive biodiversity loss. We're facing a scale and degree of change in the environment that's unprecedented. I think of it through economic and demographic terms. The world now is 7.2 billion people. It's roughly 10 times the population of the time when Thomas Robert Malthus said that population could threaten the planet. And the population has increased by 1 order of magnitude. Now, because of technology and also because of the mining of natural resources, living standards and use of natural resources is also multiplied per capita by roughly another order of magnitude. So we have 100 times or more increased intensity of use of natural resources. In many resources, at least 3 orders of magnitude greater than 2 centuries ago. And with that scale of human activity, the consequences for the biosphere, for our ecosystems, and for a series of fundamental Earth processes, such as the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the water cycle, are being fundamentally altered, and at a pace that is absolutely unprecedented. So I believe that we have entered the age of sustainable development. And by that I mean that we better enter the age of sustainable development, in which we're taking into account not only the economic dynamics, but the social and the environmental implications as well. And sustainable development, as we just heard, was defined in the Brundtland Commission a quarter century ago as meeting the needs of the current generation in a way that allows future generations to meet their needs. And I always found that not the most helpful definition, though it did give the sense of the intertemporal reality. I like the way that sustainable development is being conceived now as meaning a holistic approach to society which pays attention to three basic dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. I find this a more usable, practical definition. And sustainable development can be viewed both in an analytical context and a normative or ethical context. In the analytical context, it says that we need to understand Earth systems as a complex, interconnected, and highly nonlinear interaction of human and physical activities. That requires a new kind of science and a new kind of teaching. As a normative or ethical exercise, it means that societies have to pay attention simultaneously to three basic objectives: to economic progress, properly measured, to social inclusion and social cohesion, and to environmental sustainability. Now, we know as human beings that it's hard enough to meet one goal, but now we need to meet three goals. This is not easy, and this challenge is upon us whether we like it or not. And it's going to get tougher fast. That's the nature of rapid change. And the two crucial dimensions of rapid change that are driving this, demography and economic change, are not slowing down. Demographically, we reached 7 billion people a couple of years ago, and we will reach 8 billion people by the middle of the next decade, perhaps by 2023 or 2024, and 9 billion people on the current trajectory, barring disaster, by the 2040s. And the current medium fertility forecast of the UN Population Division puts the population at nearly 11 billion people by the end of the century. I hope it doesn't come to that, because we need a faster demographic transition through a more accelerated reduction of fertility rates, especially in Africa, but in general in the high fertility regions of the world. The other driver is economic development, which even during the post-2008 crisis remains quite fast in most of the world. The world economy is still growing at around 3.5% to 4% per year, which means in the aggregate a doubling time of roughly 20 years. And the fast growth is coming in developing countries. That's where we want it to come primarily. And it is occurring, but it means that the economic stresses on the physical Earth systems are going to be amplified. So the fundamental drivers of the challenge of combining economic, social, and environmental goals is not going to diminish, it's going to intensify. This means that every time we look at a challenge, whether it's the food supply or the energy system, we have to have three lenses, not one. And this is not an easy habit, by the way, for our political systems or our business models or our ways of discussing these issues. And we see this both in energy and food. Sometimes we say, what's the problem of the food supply? Well, it's to grow more food for a growing world population. But that is a very narrow, limited, and inadequate assessment. Or we say, what's the challenge of the world energy system? It's to extend energy and to have plentiful energy for a growing world economy. That's too narrow a perspective. It's part of it, but it's not the whole story. For any of our big challenges, whether it's energy, food, or other areas, urbanization, or land management, we need at least the three lenses: the economic, the social, and the environmental. For energy, that means that from an economic point of view, we desire plentiful, low-cost primary energy sources because that remains fundamental for economic objectives. From a social point of view, we want to reach energy for all because we live in a world of highly unequal energy access. Environmentally, the energy has to be decarbonized to a very significant extent. Otherwise, the consequences for the global climate will be unmanageable and unbearable. From a food perspective, we also want plentiful, low-cost, and nutritious food for a growing world population. Socially, there are two objectives that are crucial in the food supply. One is from the perspective of food producers, the smallholder farmers, that they're more productive and out of the poverty trap, and for poor households that they have access to affordable food. And environmentally, the food challenge is also phenomenally complicated for two reasons. The obvious reason is that climate change is undermining food security globally. One feels it in the Mediterranean, but one feels it everywhere. The climate shocks are extraordinarily dangerous. Also, however, and less recognized, is that the food system itself is one of the major drivers of environmental change. The food system is not environmentally sustainable on the production side because roughly a quarter of all greenhouse gases emanate from the food sector. If you add up the methane, nitrous oxide, and CO2 emissions from the agriculture sector, it's about a quarter of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at land use change, hands down, agriculture is the #1 cause. If you look at water depletion, hands down, agriculture is the #1 challenge. So we don't have a sustainable food system from the point of view of the ecological impacts of food production. Let's look at food and energy separately just in a few moments. Both of these are so complicated that they involve, at a technical, social, political, economic, organizational issue, a massive interconnected set of problems that require the best of our thinking and organization. So currently, the food challenge is that our food supplies have become already less stable in the last 20 years, mainly because of limitations coming from environmental shocks. Socially, we do not have a well-functioning global food system. 1 billion people are chronically undernourished in caloric protein intake. Another billion may be receiving adequate calories but not adequate micronutrients. And another billion are facing imbalanced diets leading to obesity or near obesity. So roughly 40% of the world's population is malnourished right now. That's not good. It's obviously a massive human challenge. It's also a massive testimony that Malthus still haunts us. because we haven't proven him wrong. But I would say we haven't proven him wrong for one more reason, and that is that the food system, as I mentioned, is the #1 anthropogenic driver of adverse environmental change. If you look around the planetary boundaries circle of damages, agriculture is almost always the most important sector of that, of biodiversity loss, of pollution, of greenhouse gas emissions. And so how are we going to feed the planet nutritiously, with plentiful food, with a growing population, and in an environmentally sound way, and taking into account that the underlying trends of environmental change, the drying of the Mediterranean region, more extreme heat waves, more flooding risks in many places of the world, thermal stress on crops, are all going to exacerbate these problems. If we continue with business as usual, I think the situation can become extremely dangerous. Higher relative prices of food, which can mean devastation for the poor, massive vulnerabilities of Africa and other regions to environmental shocks, and a continuing exacerbation of the environmental losses. So defining a sustainable food trajectory is a huge challenge. This is what Expo 2015 is taking up. And to do this, I think this Feeding Knowledge program can be extraordinarily important, and I think can be a huge amplifier of problem solving needed, and we should really try to do everything we can to make it that way in the coming couple of years. Is it possible to find a pathway to sustainable agriculture? Yes, because the technologies for agroecology, for more sustainable food production, for intensifying and raising the productivity of smallholder farming in Africa in a sustainable manner, for developing new crop types that are more heat resistant or saline resistant or submergence resistant are possible. But it requires a lot of thought to get this right. And just very quickly, food prices already on the rise. This is I don't have time to go through it, but our SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network theme group on food, which we will connect with the Expo 2015 very quickly, has done a kind of context analysis of the crises in various regions of the world and all of the different dimensions that one might look to on food security. And if you look at regions by column, you can see that every region of the world has several problems. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are the two epicenters of the most extreme problems in terms of poverty, malnutrition, infrastructure, water scarcity, and so forth. And we see this showing up in measurements of hunger, such as stunting of young children, where both South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are the two epicenters in the world, and also in micronutrient deficiency. Now, intensification in a smart agroecological way of smallholder farming can make a profound difference. And in the Millennium Villages project, which we work with Eni, and also now with more than 20 governments in Africa, we've seen many, many examples of raising food production at the same time as strengthening the environment, rebuilding water tables, reforestation, increasing biodiversity. But it requires a very conscious agroecological effort to bring that about. Let me turn to another challenge dear to this House, the energy challenge, equally complicated.
Ed è una sfida complicata. Io considero dunque la sfera dell'energia le sfide nel campo energetico come incredibilmente complessi, perché la tempistica è ancora più grave che non quella per la sfida alimentare. Penso che il cambiamento climatico sia senz'altro il problema di politica internazionale più grave che il mondo debba risolvere, perché è veramente incredibilmente complesso da risolvere. È facile parlarne, allora è fantastico per gli accademici, si possono scrivere migliaia di libri sulla problematica, ma cambiare dunque e risolvere il problema è incredibilmente complicato. Brevemente vogliamo vedere il problema dal punto di vista economico, sociale e ambientale. L'attuale situazione è che i prezzi dell'energia reali stanno aumentando e questo ha senz'altro svolto un ruolo nel rallentamento economico che abbiamo visto negli ultimi anni. A livello sociale abbiamo delle inuguaglianze incredibili nell'accesso all'energia moderna e le stime che vengono utilizzate oggi, penso che ci sia una banda di incertezza, ma si parla di circa 1,3 miliardi di persone che non hanno accesso all'elettricità. E vi posso dire, come esperto nel campo dello sviluppo e come economista, vi assicuro che senza elettricità non è possibile lo sviluppo nel nostro mondo. E allora questa è una realtà veramente devastante. E a livello ambientale, vediamo che il settore energetico contribuisce attualmente 36 miliardi di tonnellate all'anno.
And that is the number one aggregate driver of human-induced climate change. So we're on a rate of climate change driven most importantly by fossil fuels, which constitutes 70 to 80% of the drivers as the core of the world energy system. The trajectory is pretty robust, I have to say, and meaning that it's been hard to change the direction because the world grew up on fossil fuels and everything about modern economic life has been enabled by coal, oil, and gas. And we still live in a fossil fuel age, even as fossil fuels now threaten the planet unless we change dramatically how we produce and use energy. So we're on a path now where the reference scenario, for example, of the International Energy Agency released 2 weeks ago is a 3.6 degrees centigrade increase in the 21st century. Everything that I understand from my ecologist and climate change colleagues tell me that this is the most reckless gamble that humanity could conceivably undertake. My lead climate guru at the Earth Institute, one of the two, we have two great gurus in climate science, Wally Broker, who first used the phrase global warming in Science magazine in 1974, and James Hansen, who for 30 years was the US government's top climate scientist, think that even a 2-degree target, which is almost coming out of range, is reckless because the last time the world was 2 degrees C warmer than the pre-industrial level was about 100 million years ago during the Eemian epoch, which I didn't even, of course, know existed until it was explained to me properly by Jim Hansen that we have been so far from this range for so long that the world will look fundamentally different if we have even a 2-degree centigrade rise. In the Eemian, the sea level was 5 to 10 meters higher than it is today because the ice sheets were basically gone or substantially reduced in size. And many, many other feedbacks are also implied. And we take this for granted right now. What's a little warming among friends? But the fact of the matter is we're on a trajectory that is completely unprecedented in modern Earth's history, much less in humanity's history. And we haven't been able to figure out how to get off of it. A sustainable development trajectory requires a deep decarbonization of the world's energy system. And probably of the three main fossil fuels, coal has to be eliminated entirely, oil significantly, and gas will remain a very significant energy source in a decarbonized world. And so there would have to be quite a significant change. Of course, one major technology could change every word that I've just said, and that would be a way to effectively capture and sequester carbon dioxide so that one could use fossil fuels but take the CO2 out of the air. And that was a great hope over the last 20 years, but I would say both the mood of engineers and the direction of industry has, if not put that entirely on the back burner, is viewing that with a lot more skepticism as a scalable approach right now. And if that's the case, then we need a very, very different kind of energy system in the coming 40 years. Energy is as deeply embedded in our economy as anything is. So the infrastructure is at multi-decadal scales. The inertia is very long, and if one wants to change the direction of emissions, you have to get started early and persevere for many decades to have a significant change. We haven't started yet. 21 years after the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, we have only made tiny steps, but the overall change worldwide is a far larger emission of greenhouse gases. Now, the trick, though, is to keep our eye on all three dimensions. We don't want the economy to collapse. We don't want economic development to stop. We don't want to rule out access to modern energy for the 1.3 billion people that lack it. And so this, again, is a complex challenge. And many, many, many advocates on this issue focus on just one of the three challenges. And so many in the United States, it's just go for as much production as possible. And then there are initiatives, just go for energy access. And then there are environmentalists who say, just close down the energy system. And none of these is really a response that is compatible with sustainable development. The fact is we need a far more intelligent, multifaceted, multidimensional response. And this is just showing a famous picture now that has been seen many times this year. We reached 400 parts per million of CO2 in the spring, the highest reading of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere for 3 million years. And you can see the spike, which is nearly vertical in this 800,000-year graph. What this means is that what humanity has done in the last 50 years is completely out of bounds with Earth's experience in its geologic history. CO2 is absolutely going through every boundary that it has had for millions and millions of years. Now, let me turn to what a sustainable energy mix for Africa might entail. Africa is very rich, fortunately, in renewable energy resources, especially solar, and we've probably all seen the little square in the sub-Saharan desert which collects as much solar radiation energy as is used on the planet. And so even a small part of the Sahara could, in theory, produce the electricity that meets the worldwide needs. Africa also has massive geothermal energy in the Rift Valley. It has some wind power, though it's not an especially windy continent, but it has wind power off the coasts, especially West Africa and the Horn of Africa. And it has great hydropower potential And some of that is in areas that look to be ecologically usable, because not all hydropower is ecologically sound. But the hydropower in the Congo Basin looks to promise perhaps 50 gigawatts of power untapped right now, which could change the lives of 250 million people in Central Africa if the business, financial, political model could be developed. Thanks to Eni, we're working together on a conception of how electricity could reach all of Africa, because right now around 90% of rural Africa does not have electricity, other than maybe somebody with a car battery who charges the 1,000 cell phones in the vicinity. But for modern energy resources, we need a massive deployment. And what this picture shows is a very schematic conception that East Africa, with perhaps 300 million people, could be powered substantially by gas, with considerable renewables in addition, and gas is an excellent balancer of renewables. Central Africa could be powered substantially by hydro, and West Africa, especially the Sahel, substantially by solar power and gas. And this formulation, when done in detail, I think is needed to help provide a blueprint for the 30 or 40 years of investment ahead to build an energy system in Africa. Everybody's thrilled at the scale of the gas discoveries that Eni and others have found off the coast of Mozambique, and also similar finds off the coast of Tanzania, and other discoveries in Uganda, in Kenya, and Ghana, and elsewhere. And this is a real potential. But for that energy either not to be left simply in the ground or liquefied and sent to China, but rather to help create an energy system for Africa will require a tremendous concentrated planning effort. And economics, I want to remind us, needs planning. It needs markets and it needs planning. And I was heavily involved in my career with dismantling planning in the past, when it tried to plan everything in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. But we dismantled planning beyond what should be dismantled, because planning became an evil word, and we were told, don't plan, the market will do it. The market's an idiot. But businesses operating in the market with plans can do something. So you need forward-looking behavior. And for sustainable development, for any challenge, one needs government and the private sector and plans as well as market forces. This is without question. And we're talking about a time horizon here of 30 or 40 years, which is well beyond any kind of thinking of our political sectors these days. Italy and the US rival each other for whether the time horizon is 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or with full stability 1 year. But we need 30 or 40 years ahead to create the true sustainable development scenarios. And one of the things that we're also working with Eni on is microgrids for places that won't be reached by macro grids. This is a case of solar energy that is tailored to 20 to 50 households in a poor community using prepay energy resources. And I think there are great breakthroughs available here because of the combination of information technology and lower cost photovoltaics and new business models for bringing low cost energy to very poor communities. This is a site in, I believe this, this is in Tibi, Mali, near Bamako, but with Eni we'll be working on this kind of development in Mozambique and in other places. So, very quickly, and I know I've used up too much time, we are moving to an era not only of sustainable development, but of sustainable development goals. The world has committed to adopting SDGs. And as part of that work, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network has been established. And I hope that with the Fondazione, we could establish a partnership also within the network, because this network aims to propagate knowledge and develop knowledge and share it among hundreds, if not thousands, of universities worldwide. And with the support of Eni and others, I think we can reach a lot of the world in practical problem solving. And we're thrilled that we have a Mediterranean Basin, MedSol, Mediterranean Solutions Network of the SDSN, and Rector Angelo Riccoboni of University of Siena leads that network. He's here with us today. And this is to face these challenges within the Mediterranean Basin itself, where there are very particular problems. But I don't know about you, but I want the Mediterranean to be healthy and happy region of the world, and I suppose you do too. And there are very particular challenges, and unfortunately, this region is one of the most vulnerable to human-induced climate change of any place in the whole world. And that is simply a matter of geography, that as the planet warms, the descending branch of what's called the Hadley circulation, which is the warming near the equator and the descending of dry air extra-equatorial, will expand, and the Mediterranean basin will become drier and drier. And this is a great threat for this region, which is why we have to head off global climate change and not take it complacently. So we have the Med solutions for that. The SDSN has recommended a set of sustainable development goals. I don't have time to run through them, but they include health for all, food security, resilient cities, sustainable energy, conservation of biodiversity, and others. And the timeline to the SDGs is that as of a meeting in September 25th of the General Assembly, a 2-year timetable has been drawn up to adopt the SDGs. They will be adopted in September 2015. And at the same time, there is a 2-year race to achieve a new climate agreement, which is to culminate in Paris in November 2015. And if you look through the timetable of what's involved, there is an absolutely crucial event that I list at the bottom of this timetable, and that is the Milan Expo 2015. Because the Milan Expo 2015 will be exactly taking place at the moment that the world is adopting the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is an extremely powerful moment. The goals formally should be adopted around September 20th, 2015, and they can be celebrated at the Milan Expo. And through the work that you're doing, you can help bring them to reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for giving us these very interesting and inspiring lectures. And also thank you for giving us some good news, which especially close to Christmas time, they are really appreciated, because poverty is globally going to be reduced. But also thank you for giving us the bad part of the news, because these are very important to keep the attention high. Inequality is growing, and the gap between the poor and the rich is growing within developed countries. So this is a very critical issue. Let me make a very simple example. I come from the energy field. You have just mentioned a few numbers of the energy challenge that the let's say, for the developing countries. We have 1.3 billion of people without access to electricity, and we have 2.6 billions of people without any access to modern energy fuels. But also, in the same time, we have 50 million of European people experiencing today an issue of energy poverty, which means something like between the 50 and the 80% of the European population. This is due to the economic crisis, this is due to the unemployment rate of the youth, and also it's due to the immigration. So we have a common problem, which is energy access, which is not only related to developing countries today. So complexity is growing of our world, and we need more and more an holistic approach, and the sustainable development paradigm is exactly what we need for a problem of responsibility. We need to find a path to the growth which is compatible with the planetary boundary. So it's something that is related to the civil society at the global level, but it's also an issue of political stability, as has been mentioned very, very well. So it's something that is, should be a concern of the governmental institution and of the international organization, but it is also an issue of fair market and competitiveness. So it's something that is struggling also the private sector. So thank you again for this light that you have switched on our mind. Now I'm pleased to give the floor to Professor Eliana Laferrara, which is an expert in economic development.
Well, saying that I'm an expert when Prof Sachs is on my left, I think is very, very embarrassing. I don't think I'm an expert, but I try to work on these issues, which I share the view are really, of paramount importance for anyone now, not just people who have an interest in Africa or South Asia or something like that. So what I really enjoyed about Jeff's talk is that he sketched both a snapshot and a very realistic picture of where we stand, and a very ambitious set of goals and ends where we should try and go. And so maybe what we could try and do, and what I'd like to solicit your feedback on, is which obstacles are in the way between where we stand and where we want to go. And there's two sets of obstacles that I have in mind in particular. There's many more, but two on which I'd like to get your view. One has to do with the distribution of the gains and the costs of this transition to cleaner energy, for example. We could certainly see this at the macro level, which areas of the world, which countries are gaining and which are losing if we switch to a different source of energy or a different mode of extracting and consuming energy. But also we can see this very much at the micro level. And here I have a little bit of a bias because I'm more of a micro development person. And let's think about electrification, for example. Electrification in Africa nowadays has immense benefits. It's been shown, for example, in South Africa, where the country rolled out a massive program of electrification in rural areas, that output in the manufacturing sector went up substantially, and also it led to a very interesting change of activity and impacts on the labor markets. Why? Because the people who are in charge of doing chores that are substitutes of electricity, like collecting wood as a fuel, or go and get water, now see a lot of their time freed up. So water pumps as well as alternative fuels free up a lot of time. And who were these people within the household? They were mostly women, and in some case children. So if you think of this, there's this clear benefit at the micro level within the household, but the one who stands to benefit the most is different than the average household member. And a second example of this has to do more with nutrition. So again, we think about food, we think about diets. huge threat to health nowadays in the developing world is the use of stoves that are basically, that have very high emissions, so you get indoor pollutions. And respiratory diseases are extremely high. Again, there's recent work done on this. Who gets to benefit from cleaner stoves is the person who does the cooking. And the person who does the cooking is usually the woman. So, there's been a lot of attempts by NGOs and the aid sector to market these better stoves. And the constraint they seem to find is that if they give them for free, then sure, the stove is adopted. Maybe a few months down the line, it breaks down and nobody fixes it. So that's one story. But if they ask for even a small price, then, when the woman has to be the one making the decision, she says, sorry, I cannot buy it. I don't have authority. So if we think about these types of no-brainer solutions and what it takes to get them to work in the field, how serious are these types of constraints, if we wish, that have to do with the division of the costs and the benefits within the household or in the community? And is there a way to, to overcome them as part of this planning exercise that we might do? So maybe that's the first. I'll stop here. And
Thank you very much. And you are indeed a great expert on this and asking great questions and making big observations. Let me say a word about the macro costs and benefits of moving to a decarbonized energy system, and then something about the micro, because I think they're both very, very important and interesting. First, if we are to address the climate change issue at the macro scale that it requires, the shorthand is that while the world economy will continue to grow maybe 2 to 3 times in scale by 2050, the level of carbon dioxide emissions need to come down by more than half. And so you can see that the CO2 per unit of GNP has to come down by perhaps 75%, perhaps as much as 80 or more percent. That's the scale of the challenge. And when you do the arithmetic of that, the basic lessons are, as I said them a few minutes ago, that it seems that a few things are needed. First, of course, a lot of energy efficiency. Whenever energy can be used more efficiently, we need to look at that avenue. Second, low carbon energy, which seems to mean a phasing out of coal almost entirely. And this is especially difficult for China, India, and the United States. But it's also an issue, obviously, in Europe. But at the scale of the challenge, the U.S., China, and India are probably the biggest. The U.S. seems ready to take this on politically because the coal sector has, even though it is still significant, it's interesting that there are only around 85,000 workers in the coal industry in the United States now out of 150 million labor force. So politically, the Obama administration is taking on coal pretty directly. China's definitely not in that situation at the moment because it uses coal for perhaps almost 80% of its primary energy production at this point. But this is one part of the change. As I said, the second part of the change, in my view, is a decline of oil use and an increase of natural gas use that would accompany this, and with automobiles changing very substantially to electric or fuel cell for a large part of the fleet. And buildings also being converted from certainly heating oil to electrification to a very important extent. So one can ask, what are the consequences of all of that? And clearly the fossil fuel owning countries are the most concerned about this. And where one finds the biggest resistance to the change is in the US, Canada, Australia, Poland, at a much smaller scale, Australia, and the Middle East, naturally, because most of the remedies that have been proposed so far would lower the price of fossil fuels through emissions limits or taxes or other means. And I believe that this issue needs to be looked at quite squarely. One of the theories of economic reform is that everybody can be led to benefit if the design of the packages are done properly. And I think that one of the issues that we don't face very clearly is exactly what the macro consequences would be of this kind of energy transition. But I do think we have to plan it out more than we have done. We skirt, we pretend, we try to assert policies that don't really work, like the European trading system, which has not been an effective policy. In the United States, we have no policy to speak of. And so we need a new strategy that is, I think, much more transparent and clear about what the medium-term targets are. Your point on the micro level is extremely important, that there are also questions about how to get this done from an incentive point of view. And you raised a very particular question of whether one can have a dissemination of clean, low-carbon energy, both for cooking, for example, with cook stoves, or for electrification in a market-based manner. My own guess is that for low-income settings, we need truly a public plus private financing strategy. That the idea that this will happen purely at market prices is not right. And my experience in healthcare, for example, where a lot of donor agencies asserted that even healthcare could be marketed commercially, was completely wrong in the end, and only when there was public financing did real breakthroughs come in the control of AIDS, TB, and malaria. And there's a lot of wishful thinking that things can be done completely on a market basis, but usually for the poorest, they can't be. And we should build that into our public policies directly. Interestingly, on stoves, just as one example, there are two huge gains to moving to clean stoves that need to be supported through public policy. One is, of course, the health consequences, which are tremendous, which Professor Ferrara mentioned. The other is that the use of charcoal and coal and other forms of very dirty fuel at home actually has a global scale climate effect. And this is called the black carbon problem. The combustion of biomass and charcoal and coal at home use, especially in Asia, but also in Africa, has a global scale effect of black aerosols, which further the climate warming problem significantly. And therefore, there's actually a pure climate case for this as well that is quite powerful. So these are reasons for public financing. Our governments are so broke right now, and nobody wants to think about public financing. The United States is broke in a very odd kind of way. We have allowed the rich not to pay taxes for so long that the government then turns around and says, you see, we have no money. There's nothing we can do. So that kind of being broke isn't really very adequate. In the end, we're going to have to find tax revenues to be able to carry out the public policy purposes that are required for sustainable development to be achieved. In other words, sorry, no simple answers. I should actually, let me add one more good answer though, maybe a better one, which is that it is true that with better business models, at least semi-commercial solutions can be found. And one of the mechanisms that we're using for that distributed solar power that I showed briefly is prepay electricity, where households buy the electricity on an SMS code or a scratch card. And this turns out to be quite a feasible proposition. Unfortunately, the price points still with today's technologies are not good enough to reach the poorest households. But you can have the poorest households pay a significant part of their energy bill if there can be a public subsidy alongside it, either from an international source or from a domestic source.
Okay. Thank you for this extensive answer. Grazie per questa.
Thank you for this extensive answer, very complete answer. I now interrupt our debate, and it is my honor to give the floor to the CEO of Eni, also the chairman of our foundation, Paolo Scaroni. Thank you. Excuse me for interrupting the debate. I'll be brief. I came along just to greet Jeffrey Sachs and also Professor Ferraro, who is a new member of the board of the foundation. I must say that I'm very pleased to see that Jeffrey Sachs has now taken the habit of coming to Italy. I see him very frequently. I see him today in Bocconi, tomorrow at La Scala Theatre, the day after tomorrow at the Expo. He's always here, and I say this with very great pleasure, because you must know that the relationship between Eni and Jeffrey Sachs has gone back a few years now, because we learn a lot from him, and perhaps we teach him just a couple of points too. We develop major projects together, always within the field of sustainability. We have common objectives. We think in the same way on many things. And for example, at the moment, we are developing a project which I really love in Mozambique. I don't know if he spoke of this during his speech. Okay, he mentioned it. Okay, then I won't repeat it. Let me just say that this idea of going in the villages, very remote villages, far from the production of energy and far from the electricity grid, and thanks to some solar panels and some small networks in the villages, allow people to phone, watch television, switch on a computer, and go on the web is something fantastic. Because with very little money, it really is very little money, we open up the doors of civilization to people who never before have had access to this. So it's a beautiful, feasible, not expensive project with extraordinary results. But it's just one of the many projects which we carry out, and will organize many others, always within this philosophy. I don't know if we thought of this first or if Jeffrey Sachs thought of it first, namely that water is indispensable for life, electricity is indispensable for development. This is the fundamental idea behind it all. Without electricity, there is no development. So all these things Jeffrey sees from his viewpoint as a great economist. We see this from our point of view as a company which must grow, must produce profits and satisfy its shareholders. And so all this we do and insert inside that model of the Mattei style. We love to refer to Mattei. The growth of our business, especially in Africa, truly depends on how we manage to be closer to the populations close to which we carry out our oil activities. We say something which is even more important, because we'd like to say that in whatever country Eni operates in, with its people, its machinery, its drilling equipment, its ships, the population living in the area immediately feels the benefit of our presence. For example, now in Mozambique, we practically haven't reached the land yet, because our great discovery was sea-based. We have already provided a lot of healthcare opportunities to the village of Palma, where we'll set up a hospital, where there will be schools, so that the people living in the area will say, oh, Eni has come along and I can draw a benefit from this right from the start. This is a beautiful model around which we have built our African presence. So if today we are the #1 African company, this is due to Mattei's legacy. He has made us sensitive and aware of the needs of the communities close to which we work. So electricity, but not just electricity, there's also education, healthcare, agriculture. So we will continue to make an effort in this direction, so that on the one hand, our activities will be sustainable, but on the other hand, this is an integral part of our business, because we have the reputation of being the African company, that is the company operating in Africa which is closest to the land, to the people. So we also want Expo, as today we're speaking of Expo, we want Expo to play a role too. The city of Milan, let me remind you of this, was chosen compared to Smyrna, also thanks to a lot of African countries which voted in favor of Milan. There'll be a major presence of African countries here in Milan, and there will be once again the opportunity of debating these topics. We'll do this together with Jeffrey in this very moment in which Africa grows at such a rhythm that we're starting to believe that it's becoming the China of the 2030 or 2040. If Africa grows, we will certainly work in favor of its growth, because we want to grow together with Africa. Thank you, and I leave you to your debate.
Okay, let's come to debate, and I have a double-faced question for you, Professor Sachs. You have mentioned that a couple of weeks ago the World Energy Outlook 2013 has been published, and in this paper we see that in this document we see that the programs that are expected to happen in Africa will not be so brilliant, because of the 1.3 billion of people. Maybe in 2013 we will have something like around 1 billion of people still lacking electricity, and the issue of those who do not have access to modern energy fuel will more or less stay the same. Good progress will be done in Asia, developing Asia, led by China and India, but Africa will still there. So we cannot say that there has not been any attention in the last couple of decades. So in which direction we should drive our efforts? I mean, partnership is for sure one very essential element, but I feel also that there is space for innovation, which need not to be considered only as a technological innovation, but also something that goes beyond innovation, technology. I mean, when we speak about how to electrify rural area, we often have in mind our model of our business model or our common policies, but in these places I think that we should do a big effort to innovate the business models and also to innovate the financial mechanisms in order to arrive to the poor, to those who are really the poor, for improving their livelihood capitals, I mean. So this is the first piece of the answer. But if we need innovation, we need the people able to do innovation. So are we really sure that as academicians we are training the right person, and we are training the people with the right capacity to face such big challenges at the worldwide level? We have spoken today, and also I'm coming from a conference in Milan we have organized in these days, speaking about the nexus between water, energy, and food. So we need people who are able to speak each other on many different things. So we need a major integration between disciplines. But I'm not so sure, and I'm a professor at Politecnico di Milano, that the way in which we are training the young people is the right one. So which is the kind of support that the UNSDN can give to the worldwide set of universities in order to find a new path for training the next generation of professionals?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Let's focus on this Energy for Africa challenge and take your questions in that way. The basic point that one cannot envision ending poverty or achieving economic development without electricity should be the starting point, period. No country should be satisfied that by 15 years from now, even if not sooner, that it would have any significant part of the population outside of electricity access. So from my point of view, the starting point would be energy for all within the period of this new set of goals. This is not the trajectory that the world is on right now. The normal trajectory would still probably leave 40 or even 50% of Africa's rural population without access, even 15 years from now, because populations are poor, because financial markets do not work all that well in these contexts, or not at all, because even if there are high returns to these investments, getting these investments done requires a policy as well as a financial framework. You know, even the IMF would tend to say to countries, don't borrow to build your energy infrastructure. That would be the normal assumption. That would take on too much debt. And yet, when I speak with senior IMF officials these days, they say, no, we would like to find ways, financial models for African countries to even borrow to build the infrastructure that's needed so that they can grow because the returns are so high. So I think your point that we need new business and financial models is completely correct. It's my perception, and definitely perception of many colleagues. At a micro scale, this may mean new micro models, for example, for the prepay electricity. At the larger scale, it means more creative financing that mixes some grants or truly concessional finance with some market-based finance to get the job done. And I think also for Eni, with this massive amount of natural gas, for example, which could transform East Africa, it won't happen unless there are political, clear strategies to bring this about, as well as large-scale financing underpinning those political strategies, as well as local micro-level business models of how that gas can reach local communities, be used, be metered, be purchased, and so forth. So my view is we need very bold, very aggressive scale-up plans, and then to work backwards to the financing models, the public finance part, in order to be able to implement that. Otherwise, it's just too cruel to envision a framework in which a country is going to still have half its population without electricity a generation from now. That's no solution. That's just accepting a completely inadequate scenario. And I've been very much promoting rapid scaling up of healthcare in the last 15 years. And there's a lot of demonstrated progress in that. It's required public-private partnerships, new financial models, new technologies, a combination of all of those, and a lot of trained people who can implement scaling up in these areas. But it tells me that this is possible. You're completely correct that we need to train people in a new way to even understand professionally the interconnections. Normally, economics students learn nothing about engineering, infrastructure, the physical world. The physical world is not part of an economist training. The first thing you learn in economics is assume a world. Then we assume that the world has M sectors. None of them involves a physical resource. Then we assume some production functions, none of which an engineer would recognize. And then we put it through a supply and demand analysis. And if it's more mathematical, then you publish it in a journal. This is not a valid field in this way. Economics, when it works, is an engineering field. It is not a scientific field, it's an engineering field. I like engineering. Engineering means that you rely on science, but you apply it to solve problems. And economics wants to be physics, but it would be much more interesting if it were engineering, because the fundamental laws of economics are not so interesting, but getting electricity to people is interesting. And it's something that I think economists could be helpful with. So I left the economics department, I have to confess, how many years ago? 17 years ago, to work in sustainable development, which I find a much more adequate field. But it's a new field. The idea of sustainable development is that we have engineers, economists, policy analysts, public health specialists, hydrologists working together to solve real problems. And that's what the Earth Institute is. And now we have at the Earth Institute 1 PhD program, 7 master's degree programs, and 1 undergraduate program in sustainable development. Because we said we can't rely on the normal disciplines to get this work done. And I think we have to invent our own fields in this way. We are propounding through SDSN a master's program in sustainable development, which we'd love to work with you on. And I have put on a website for an open course starting in January on the course called, the open website called Coursera. I've taped my own classes. So there are 70 little lectures on all aspects of sustainable development, from energy to water to climate change to biodiversity to poverty reduction to malaria control, 70 20-minute lectures. And I've written a little book which will go online for free. All of it's free, total open access. I'm hoping that we can develop such free materials for worldwide dissemination and use. The book is a book on Introduction to Sustainable Development, but it can just be downloaded at no cost. So this is the way that I would like to go. Distance training, online materials, and interdisciplinary programs.
A good platform for sharing knowledge, I guess. And my experience is that sometimes it is more easy to make such a big advancement in, for instance, in engineering. When you work, I have a project in Egypt where we are working for a sustainable development Master of Science program, and this is doable in Egypt. It is less doable in Italy and in the European system, with such a big issue of the Bologna process and so on. Now I would like to open the floor for discussion, and we have a couple of programmed speech. The first one is Professor Angelo Riccaboni from the University of Siena, who is director of the university, and he will give us some idea of the Med Solution Network. You can come.
Buongiorno a tutti, ringrazio per l'invito.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Foundation for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure being here. Listening once more to Mr. Jeffrey Sachs' presentation, I believe that his contribution to sustainable development is a very relevant one indeed. As an Italian, I'd like to point out this slide because it is a unique opportunity for our country, the Expo 2015. In those months, we are going to be facing globally a number of topics which we're lucky enough to deal and discuss through Expo. And I believe that this is really going to be interesting for all of us. We know all too well that political instability makes difficult to work on these topics. With this new scenario, and through that, we'll be able to grasp this unique opportunity, which is indeed a fortuitous one because there is no planning behind it, but it can be nevertheless extremely interesting. Professor Jeffrey Sachs was pointing out before that he's leading this World Network on Sustainable Development Solutions, and this is a truly fascinating endeavor because it really pinpoints the contribution that universities and research centers can give you in terms of defining solutions to issues having to do with sustainable development. He hasn't said it, and I dare say it myself also vis-à-vis the past. When it comes to mankind's big problems, research has given a very, very innovative contribution, and also innovations coming from universities and research centers. And when it comes to the great challenges of sustainable development, this is going to be a very attracting factor. That's why he has set up this network. We have the honor of coordinating this network for the Mediterranean region, and we are available to anybody who would like to come in. We have 15 members after just a few weeks without having launched a promotional effort. This means that the program by itself is interesting. Jeffrey's goal is to get to 1,000. Here in the Mediterranean, we should get to 150. So we're available to work together. I'd like to point out once more that the topic is solutions. We don't want to indeed ponder, because I'm sorry if I pinpoint this particular subject matter once more. One of the letters of the acronym is S, which stands for solutions. So we want to gather contributions from all colleagues in the Mediterranean area. So there are lots of networks, lots of people we're in contact with. I just give you an example, because when it comes to talking about solutions, often it's very hard to talk about that. We have quoted the example of Eni vis-à-vis access to energy, and then there is another project which is financed by Novartis, that is the definition of paramedics or other job creation efforts, and then the flagship initiative in the Mediterranean, which is a particularly interesting endeavor that has been promoted on the monitoring, management and mitigation of issues connected with the so-called microplastics. We have a project called Plastic Buster. We're working on it. There are other projects as well, but I don't want to bore you with just listing all of them. But this is a very interesting project launched by a university, scalable, and brings about solutions. And therefore, we really have to concentrate on this. And thanks to today's meeting, we hope to get other entities cooperating. Professor Colombo and Professor Pellini, etc., are already working with us. We have to avoid being redundant and promoting solution. I close with a question to Professor Jeffrey Sachs. The problem of sustainable development is a typically cultural one. That is, we have to try to change people's mindset, and we're all aware that it is only through the new generations that we are going to raise the bar of civil awareness. And I believe that also the debate on sustainable development can be a way of promoting some principles. And given that education is certainly the most powerful lever, my question to you, Professor, is what about future programs, or how can we, through the project of Sustainable Development Goals, promoting this principle with young people as well?
You have another job before lunch.
Thank you. One of the reasons that I am so enthusiastic about us having sustainable development goals, or SDGs, is that I think it can open the public's mind to these issues. It's not guaranteed, but I think it's actually one of our best hopes. In 1992, when the world met at the Rio Earth Summit, there was sustainable development was adopted, and a document was adopted alongside that conference called Agenda 21. Who here has read Agenda 21? Anybody? Okay. I also not, even though I've taught this subject for 21 years since then, because it's 350 pages. It didn't capture anyone's imagination. It was, it may be terrific from an analytical point of view. It may be necessary from a UN administrator's point of view, but it had no public life. And everything that was done at that meeting became the very narrow technical set of issues that only appears in our politics very indirectly and in our awareness. And even when we have meetings of the climate conference, for example, like last week's meeting in Warsaw, I don't know what it was like in Italy's coverage, probably more in the news than in the US, but in the US it was small article once every 3 or 4 days of the 2-week meeting. It had no public awareness at all. If you listen to a talk show, nobody would even mention it, that there was a climate meeting going on. So this becomes a diplomat's world, not the public's world. And I think the public doesn't understand what this issue is about. And how could we have otherwise, because nobody's explained it. It's not clear. People know that the climate's changing. They don't like that. They don't really know what the alternatives are. In general, our governments, at least I'll speak for mine, I suspect it's true here too, the US has no plans. We don't have an energy plan. It's amazing. You know, we had a Nobel laureate as our Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu. He didn't appear in the public for 3 years because the political operatives in the White House were terrified that he might say something true. And that's not what politics is about. And so he was at a press conference early in President Obama's first term in the Caribbean, and he said, you know, these islands might be threatened by the climate change that's coming. And there was an article written about how two of the top political aides said, who the hell let this guy speak? And this wasn't on the program, and how did, you know, this isn't our, climate's not our agenda for the next 6 months. We're not supposed to be talking about this. Who let this guy get to who let the reporters get to this guy? And the truth is, he was not heard from again. One of the top political aides said, you know, never again let this guy have a press conference. Never will he travel with the president. This is a Nobel laureate. Frankly, I'd 10 times rather listen to him than to a politician, because he might tell us something valuable for our future. So I say all of this because we need more clarity in our lives. This is an answer to Angelo's question. It's not an answer, it's my reflection on the question. How we're going to get something done. Now, with the Millennium Development Goals, they're not also front and center of our daily lives, but they have taken a role because they're simple. There are just 8 of them. You can actually draw them in a cartoon for each of the 8 goals. And my test of the Sustainable Development Goals is whether every school child in the year 2020 will know them. And can a child in Milan, in maybe the 4th grade, write a paper about why the Sustainable Development Goals are important for Italy? And can a child in Mombasa, in the 4th year of school, write an essay why the Sustainable Development Goals are important for Kenya, and so forth? This will be more important than what they mean for our for anybody else, actually, because then the politicians will start to listen when these issues are publicly understood and are in the public presence. And I quote John F. Kennedy all the time because I think he knew how to lead and how to inspire people. And one of the things that he said is, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. So this is what goals can do. And you can inspire people with goals. And similarly, when President Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely to Earth within the decade, everybody understood what that was about. And interestingly, when he said it, NASA had no plan on how to do it, which is amazing. No political advisor would let a president make such a statement today. Almost impossible. Are you crazy? There isn't even a plan. But President Kennedy forced the plan. It was actually a year and a half later that they decided on the basic strategy of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions, how to get the thing done. But he forced it, and it worked within the decade. What if a leader actually said, we are going to create a safe energy and food system in our generation, or we're going to end extreme poverty, and tried to carry it out? Well, we'd get a lot done. And so this, I think, is not the full answer, but I do believe that the public awareness can be a major impetus to change. And then curriculum in primary schools and secondary schools, certainly at the university level, can bring this about. And it's one of the commitments of the SDSN. We are forging a partnership with the University of Lund, which has been developing a high school curriculum for a long time. And we want to help propagate a high school curriculum on sustainable development. But it should go even to the primary schools. And once we have the SDGs, I think that we can help a big, big dissemination at the primary school level, that's where the change is going to come, and young people are going to be the ones to make the sustainable world.
Please, Alice.
May I say, make a little suggestion? I have a dream.
Good.
Good starting point.
My suggestions deal with the need to open minds. The next Expo will be in Dubai with the theme Connecting Minds. Why not work on a visionary bridge from feeding knowledge to connecting minds?
I love it. It's a great idea. That's a great idea. And that's a wonderful idea. And by the way, can I say a word about expos for one moment? Because I'm an expert on expos, because when I was 10 years old, I went to the New York World's Fair, and it changed my life, because the New York World's Fair opened the eyes. There were some wonderful exhibits of what the future technologies were going to be. And we know throughout the history of expos that expos have played this role, from the first crystal exposition in England in 1851 to the Paris Expo in 1889, the Chicago Exposition in 1893, the New York World's Fair in 1939. And one of the things that these expos have all done is very, very visually shown the future. And in 1939, actually, it was the first time Americans saw the concept of a highway system. It was a big, very wonderful exhibit, and it showed America what suburbia would look like in the second half of the 20th century. And it played a very big role in the public's mind. So when we think about feeding the world energy for life, I hope there are plans underway, or there should be plans for not only describing analytically, but showing what a future can look like, illustrating a future energy system, illustrating sustainable agriculture by letting people look and say, I get it. And this, I think, can be really, really, really powerful. Somebody said it to me a couple days ago in the same vein. You know, one of the problems with climate change is that it's a frightening topic, and people don't know what do you want? What's the future? And when Al Gore made his movie, Inconvenient Truth, I don't know how many people saw it, there were no solutions to it. It was just, we're going to destroy ourselves. And whatever one thinks about that, it doesn't lead to change, because it doesn't say what to do, or it doesn't create the imagination of what it could look like. So someone said, we need a move. I said something, we need to show the vision of what the world can be in 2050. And somebody said, yeah, you need to make a movie of that. And that's actually probably right, that the visualization is crucial for this. And I think the expos historically have played that role, and this one can too.
Thank you, and thank you, Alice, also for this very important opportunity of connection. Now we have another programmed speech, and we have spoken about Africa, so we are lucky to have some African colleagues who are joining with me in an European project, and in order to keep this gender unbalance that is quite clear today, I would like to give the floor to Suki Kalu, Professor Suki Kalu. She is Deputy of Director for the International Relationship, or something like that, from the Technical University of Kenya. Suki, you can come.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. I wasn't expecting this to be so formal. And I will be giving some part of this view, but I'll also be having my colleague who's with us. Just to introduce, we are 4 universities from the eastern region of Africa. We have, and I think I'll just allow them to stand up so that you can see where they are. But I'll mention first, he's my colleague from Technical University of Kenya in Nairobi, Professor Gola. I can't remember all the names, believe it or not. Yeah. I'm going to be very quick. I just quickly. I'll be quick. I'll be very quick. Very short.
Joseph from the Technical University of Mombasa.
Thank you. Yes, I am Sostenes Karugaba from Dar es Salaam Institute of Technology in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
I'm Venkata, Professor of Sustainable Energy Engineering, Jimma University, Ethiopia.
I am Balogize Zaru from Jimma University, Ethiopia.
Okay. So thank you. I'm just going to really be short about this. But for the last couple of days, we've been having another conference, which has been looking at the nexus of water, energy, and food. And there's a lot of things that have been going through my mind. I've been hoping to have a day that I can really put them together, but one word that came up very clearly for me was trust. And why did it come up? When we're looking at these various developments, and I asked myself, so why would Africa not want to enjoy the development that the West has had? We're listening to all these different aspects of how we need to make change. But there is that thinking that, and it's a programming we've had since independence, that we need to develop like the West. And now we're being asked to shift. And to shift that thinking that we want development like the West, we want fast trains, we want all those things, we want them just as much. But there's an implication in terms of water, energy, and food. That is going to be a real attitude change that is going to need to be there. There is poverty, yes, but there is also the thinking that we want to be developed. And that is going to be a real challenge to shift that and go backwards, because people will say, well, why weren't we given the same opportunity? Now that we have oil, now that we have coal, we have an opportunity to be developed. So that is going to be quite a challenge we're going to have. The other thing is, when we've had sustainable, or shall I say, when we've had projects or initiatives or interventions, various projects that have come from multilateral, bilateral. In most cases, the projects are wonderful during the time period. But at the point when the time finishes, the sustainability of those initiatives break down. And that is a very critical point which is never really dealt with. So again, I'm talking about trust. How do we deal with that continuity at the time that an initiative or a project finishes? How do we, that is a point of sustainability that is a major concern. And you find whether we work with our governments or we work with communities, that is where there's no trust. And they don't believe you're going to actually achieve anything. It's going to be, oh, they've come again. We'll go through this, and when it's finished, yeah, we know. We'll get back to life, and life continues as normal. The other aspect I wanted to mention was, because of the educational changes, there are also great opportunities. Just to give you an example, Technical University of Kenya, we just became a university January this year, even though we have been existent as an institution of some kind since 1961. We've moved from a polytechnic to a university college to a university in a 5-year period. But it has its opportunities, because here we are to guide a whole lot of technical training institutions. They are seeing us as mentors. We don't have a template. The government hasn't given us a template. So on one hand, that's a challenge. On the other hand, that gives us an opportunity to decide how we can move about things. And so these projects which we're having, like Energize and all, can begin to feed into some of these gaps which we're having in terms of our templates. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention, and I guess I'm talking now as a designer, is the creative side. How can we use creative industries in terms of storytelling, the arts, text, images, which go along with exhibits, which actually help with attitude change, which give new images that give imagination, visualization. I think that's an area, and communication, that's an area that has to develop side by side with all these other technological innovations, because that's what enables people to see what is possible and gives hope. So I think that's an area that we really need to consider. But I do have a question I would like to ask very briefly. My understanding in the energy development, you talked about the energy development footprint, a blueprint in Africa. From my understanding, it's not just for Africa, it has possibilities for providing world energy needs. That is my understanding. One is, when will this blueprint be disseminated? Why am I asking this question? At the moment, you have just mentioned about phasing out coal, and at the moment, East Africa, Kenya, is facing coal exploitation by China right now. So we've talked about this blueprint, but right now, where I come from, it's under and in fact, it was supposed to have, the project was supposed to have started this year. For some reason, political reasons, it has been on a pause, but we're dealing with these things right now. The other question I have is, to what extent and how do you see African universities participating in this blueprint and its process? Those are the two questions I'd like to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for wonderful statements. First, on development per se, I think my starting point and the starting point of the recommendations of this network, SDSN, is that countries have the right to develop, and they have the expectation of development. But the development of all countries has to go in a manner that is sustainable. And so this isn't to say to anybody, this is the end of development, but rather to say that all countries have to make changes in the direction. You're completely accurate in the perception of development up until now, that you basically follow the lead of countries just in front. They did this, we'll do this, we're a little bit behind, but we're catching up. And now I think the hard part is that all countries need to change strategy, because it doesn't add up anymore that we follow that same long principle. But it's the high-income countries that have to change at least as much or even more proportionately. For example, right now the world is emitting 36 billion tons of carbon dioxide. And since there are 7 billion people on the planet, that's about 5 tons per person. The United States is emitting 17 tons per person. Kenya, I would guess, less than 1 ton. I'd have to check, but I would be pretty sure it would be less than 1 ton per person. We need to move by 2050 to, say, no more than 18 gigatons globally. With a 9 billion population, that would be 2 tons per person. So this would mean that Kenya would rise from 1 ton to 2 tons, and the United States would decline roughly from 17 tons to 2 tons, or be on that trajectory. So you see who's got the hardest work to do. Also, Kenya has a very nice rift valley with lots of geothermal potential, and you're going to have lots of different options, also with solar and some wind on the coast, and also with the hydrocarbons to make a mix. So I think that the job is going to be for everybody, but it is absolutely true that it's not simply creating the system that one had before. And that means that we all have to learn a more creative way to do this. On your observation about sustainability of projects, this is completely correct. And I think there needs to be two aspects to this. One is to build in sustainability as one of the goals from the very beginning. And that can be through the business model and also through the political connection with governments. That this is not something being done from the outside, but it's being done locally, if possible, helped from the outside. And so this can make the projects more sustainable. Then on the creativity, this, I think, is what I was saying, and you said it better. We have to show what the future can look like. It needs to be inspiring. We have to show the possibilities, so we need you to tell us how to do that. This is really, really important. And then finally, on energy for Africa, I don't think these choices can be made without a game plan. And the game plan has to be acceptable. It has to really help to power Africa's development. It has to have a financial and economic logic to it. And these game plans don't exist right now. That's why the decisions are made in a very ad hoc way. And we need to create a strategy. And then what is the role of coal? What is the role of other resources? By the way, some coal is for coking and for steel sector, such as Mozambique's large coal deposits. Other coal is for thermal power, and I believe that thermal coal, I just don't believe it's going to have a big future, except if carbon capture and sequestration becomes a feasible reality. So I wouldn't bet a country's future on thermal coal.
Thank you. There is one question from the floor now, which I think that will lead us to close. Eliana, you can jump in whenever you want.
Thank you, Manuela. Stefano Pizziali from Intervita NGO. A question for Professor Sachs. Which kind of collaboration, cooperation can be established between NGOs, civil societies, and corporate sector, business sector, in the implementation of SDGs? This is a crucial point for the implementation of these new aims for the global sustainability. Thank you.
Absolutely. Everything about this issue is about the multiple stakeholders, corporate, civil society, and government, and finding good models. And of course, each kind of issue and each sector has to develop its own models. In the Millennium Development Goals, a lot of good models have been created for scaling up primary health care, for example. This has been one of the biggest successes. We don't have that yet on sustainable local energy, but we're going to need to develop it. And that's part of Eni's purpose also in promoting this, is to find good models that can work on the ground and that can be scalable. And in general, communities locally have to take some leadership. NGOs can support that. Companies provide technology. And then the business model, the financing, becomes one of the big questions, and it will depend on exactly which type of problem is being addressed. I think Eni sees a future for this off-grid distributed power. Last week I was with a wind power company in New York, Vestas, the big Danish wind power company. They're interested in scaling up wind power in the windy places in Africa. They've identified in Ethiopia and in Senegal 2 starting points, and in Kenya, actually, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Senegal. They're also trying to figure out the right business model for this, because they have efficient turbines that can replace diesel quite effectively and more cleanly, but they need the business model to do it, and that's what they were launching last week is a project like that. So I think that we are definitely in the multi-stakeholder world, and the goals need to direct us to the kinds of problems that need to be addressed and where the priorities lie. And again, we need a game plan that gives an overall picture, so it's not just a mosaic of whatever project comes to mind, but actually something that adds up to a structured, true transformation. This is what the SDGs should help accomplish.
Okay, thank you. And now we come to an end. So we come back home today with the idea in mind that there is an urgent need to act, but we have some direction that are set down. We need an holistic approach, we need multidisciplinarity, we need a new kind of education, creative innovation, and we need trust. Trust between all the stakeholders that somehow has a role within sustainable development. And this gives us some hope, which is always a nice place to start project on. So with this word, I would like to thank again Jeffrey Sachs for his speech and Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei for this opportunity to all of us. Thank you.